But all right, let's do it. Let's do a quick review on Forspoken. All right, so this game, obviously, a lot of controversy about the dialogue in it. Honestly, the dialogue's not bad. If you play the game, you understand how it is. So I don't have a problem with that. Graphically, this game has a lot of problems, but it's also not as bad as people say again, right? Like, I think so many people were saying, it looks like a PS3 game, it looks like a PS4 game. I think that if you look at the character models, there's no way it looks anything like that. When I looked at God of War Ragnarok, at the trailers of God of War Ragnarok, I thought, man, this really looks like a game that's meant for both PS4 and PS5. You can tell how much they held it back by making it cross-gen, right? And I felt the same way about this game, except the art direction in this game I feel is so whack. Look at Sepal right here. That is trash. That is so bland, so ugly. There's nothing interesting about the way Sepal looks, and that's supposed to be the core city in the entire game, right? That is terrible. And then when you go out in that first area right outside Sepal, right, it's just bland Elden Ring. It looks like Elden Ring, but worse, right, which is not a good look for it. When you finally venture like far enough outside of those areas, the game looks way better, right? But the main areas you start in for the first like few hours, no bueno. It just looks terrible, especially compared to the rest of the game. So it's like they have these areas that look really nice, and then these areas that look like acceptable, and then they have the areas like Sepal, which is like, what were you thinking, you know? And then the lighting is like all over the place. Some parts lighting is like great, whatever, and I don't know if this has to do with whether it's like the ray tracing settings they had, or, you know, trying to make performance mode work correctly or whatever it is, it doesn't always look good, right? There's so many times when Frey's model, like at the very end right there, Frey's model looked great, right? When she's looking up and you can see the lighting on her face, she looked fantastic there. But so many other parts of the game, it just looks like, wow, this doesn't even look like the same model. This looks like a PS4 model, whereas the one at the end of the game looks like a PS5 model, you know? And it's just like, it's all over the place. So it's really hit or miss. So graphically, it's more of a, I wouldn't say a miss than a hit, but it's like a 7 graphically, when it should have been like an 8.5, 9 easily, you know? Yeah, and then other stuff like the menu fisheye lens, UI, like those are, again, design decisions or art direction decisions, and they're just funky, you know? They don't really help anything. It's just weird. It just gives its own personality by being different for the sake of being different, essentially, right? The combat system, right? Let's talk about combat. So this game, the combat, it starts off very limited, right? And you end up, I ended up just using my auto attack non-stop, right? And I was like, okay, that's interesting. You can charge it up, whatever. I didn't realize that all the support magic had their own individual cooldowns, and once I realized that, the combat system felt way better. The game did not do a good job explaining that to me, right? So once I figured that out, that I could use all these different abilities for support magic, and they all have individual cooldowns, then I liked it way better, right? And then once you hit the second set, the fire set, right, you're like, oh damn, now I can swap between these two sets. Then it got super interesting. However, that happened super late. That was like at chapter 6, right? This game only has 12 chapters, so it took you half the game essentially to get to a point where finally the combat got interesting. Like if they had put that fire set, introduced it earlier into the game, like at chapter 3, you know, chapter 4 at the latest, then all of a sudden you're like, oh damn, now I'm like getting somewhere, right? It's very interesting very sooner, and it, you know, would have pulled you into the game earlier, which would have been much better, I think. So that's like one flaw with the combat and just how they paced it out. But really, across the entire game, you know, when you get to the end of it, there's a lot to do in the combat system. And honestly, even myself, finishing the game now, I still feel like I could have been way better with all of it, right? So it's this weird feeling of I could have mastered it, I could have gotten even better at it, but I do feel it needed a quick cast system for like your 4 most favorite spells you want to do without having to swap to the skill set, switch to the specific spell, then cast. You know, I wish I could have just hit something plus something, and boom, that's that spell, you know? Some quicker way, or maybe even make a wheel of just my favorites, you know? That would have been a much easier way to like feel like a master of all the abilities you have control over. So that was like a really cool addition to combat system, but oh damn, there's more. All right, so let's go back to this combat. So combat system, right? The weapon wheel, like I thought it was interesting. You don't actually have to have it slow down. You can actually have it be where it's just instant, but it's too fast. It's too much stuff. There's too many enemies. You need it to slow down in that instance, right? So you have like technically by the end of the game, you have 4 weapon wheels that you're scrolling through to pick the spell you want to use, which is a lot, right? But outside of that, the AI for the combat was really the thing that was lacking, because in a game that's primarily range-based, right, like it's really easy to play run away and just shoot at them nonstop, right? So you need AI that can somehow defeat that, but there was no AI that was really challenging in that way. the biggest challenge with AI was just the sheer number of them, and you had to beat the lantern while they all surrounded you, sort of deal. Or you had the birds, which are flying, which, you know, flying enemies in Square Enix games are just a pain in the ass, right? And that's how it seems to be. So those are my major gripes about the combat. I guess the other thing I should say is I started this game the hardest difficulty, and then I turned it down to normal because it felt like everything was just too bullet spongy. So I feel like there was a middle ground there that would have made the entire game feel better. You know, it just if the combat was just a little tighter, the entire game would have been even better, right? So I think that was like probably a 7 out of 10 again for the combat, when it could have been like an 8.5 or something, you know. So that's an area I feel like the entire game would have felt better. The whole world exploration, I really liked the map actually, and how the map showed you what you were going to get by going to these different open world areas. Like, it's like, oh, you can get mana here, you can get stat increase there, you know, you can get, you know, just a journal entry here. I'm like, okay, I'll skip those, whatever, right? The dungeons were, at first they seemed kind of whack, but I kind of liked knowing that I could go in there and find some kind of new challenging monster thing. That was pretty neat. The mutants around the world were fun challenges, but I didn't really do most of them. I just felt like, okay, I understand what these are for. They're cool to test yourself from here and there, but, you know, not really something I wanted to spend a lot of time with in general. The cities and traversing the cities was really fun. The traversal in this was really cool, right? Because by the end of the game, you're flying, basically. You're just using, like, the strafe jump mechanic, I've heard it's called, but it's the one where you jump and you land, you hit the button, and you go even further, and she does, like, another cartwheel or whatever, forward flip. That mechanic was super neat by the end, right? She's got the lasso, so there's all these movement mechanics that get introduced that make just traversing the open world a lot of fun by the end of it, right? Like when we get flashback to the story lore chapter in chapter 11, and I'm just like running through the areas that I started the game off with, and I'm just like flying through it, whereas when we first played it, I could like barely make those, like, how do I get up this wall? You know, and now I'm just like flying everywhere, right? So that was cool. The actual story, I think, is the big selling point of this game, right? I don't think this game is meant for like hardcore combat people. I think they want people who want to just like kick back, play a game for fun, take up some time, enjoy the story, right? And I think the story is actually pretty decent. It's got its flaws. The dialogue is actually not terrible, as I talked about earlier. Although some parts were very repeated, you know, like whatever Cuff would say something like, you know, there's like, be on a good lookout, whatever, you know, some shit's about to happen. She'd be like, oh yeah, I got it, stay frosty. I think I heard that like 30 or 40 times, which is way too much, you know, like that's a joke, right? That's a reference to another game. You don't want that to be a repeating line throughout the entirety of the game. You want that just as like once or twice here and there, right? Spread out across your 20 hours in the game, not literally every 30 minutes or something. But yeah, story was great. I thought the story was cool. I liked the twist they had in it. Yeah, I don't know. Not much more to say about that. I'd give the story like an 8.5. You know, it wasn't like the most crazy thing ever, but it was good. It wasn't a bad story. It wasn't something I'd be like, oh my god, kill me now. You know, it was, which I've had plenty of games that have felt like that. It was very predictable, and this one wasn't very predictable. So for me, that gets bonus points for that. I think that's basically it. The right combat, graphics, story, open world, graphics. Music, I guess there wasn't much music that was super interesting. Like the boss battles were a little interesting, but overall it's this kind of muted thing. It's not like a super epic feel to the music. So it was kind of other than this main theme, the rest of it is kind of forgettable, right? So maybe like an 8 out of 10 again. Wasn't crazy good, crazy bad. But world and level design, you hate the hub. You talking about like this main where Sapal is? I don't know, like, you know, it sounds like it's the hub. It's the part of the story that they brought you back to, so it's kind of like the hub. But like, yeah, just the art design here was terrible, right? Like, I didn't mind running around it, but I didn't want to talk to anybody, right? Oh, I should talk about the side quests. The side quests were terrible. You know, that thing where you have those little animations that play every time you want to do something that just take up an extra 3 seconds each time to go into and out of those animations, just like totally drag everything down unnecessarily, right? Like in the story chapter, where she has to touch the orb, you go to, you hit triangle, it should just play whatever it's going to do, but instead, Frey's got to, like, the camera has to readjust, then Frey's got to reach out her hand, and then it starts, right? If you want to just talk to a random NPC who has a triangle on their head, whatever, you have to go up to them, you hit the triangle, instead of them just talking, you know, the camera has to position, then that's to load the dialogue, then they start talking, right? It takes time every time you're gonna do anything, which makes you not want to do anything, right? So that sucks. That's like a technical issue that they didn't really address or, you know, polish as much as they should have, I feel like. But overall, I still enjoy the game. You know, I think overall, if I have to rate it based off all that, I think it's probably like a 7.5. Yeah, I think 7.5 out of 10 is where I go on this one. Yeah, it's a fun one-time play. It's a fun one-time play. I do recommend it. I saw a lot of people complaining about the price of the game. It's the price of games nowadays. You know, I think that a lot of the price of games nowadays has to do with all these new membership subscription services that are out, right? Like, you can buy Dead Space right now for, you know, 60, 70 bucks on PC, or you can pay $16 and just play it on EA Play and never own it and never have to play it again. So I think that because of that, it's pushing up the price of games, and it's probably going to stay up like that. If you want to wait, I'm sure this game will end up on PlayStation Plus at some point. We all know games go on sale. It'll go on sale at some point, and it'll probably be worth just, you know, playing around with it for 20, 30 bucks, whatever. Spend your 20, 30 hours and be done with it. But I had a good time with it. I thought the story was cool. It seems like they could potentially go with a sequel to this now. There could also be a prequel. I saw someone say this prequel DLC plan for it. I think the coolest thing about this, though, right? All those issues aside, is that it's a new IP and they spend money to make a new IP, right? This isn't like, you know, Final Fantasy 29. You know, it's not Madden 64, which is, you know, not a Nintendo game, I'm saying. You know, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like Madden 48 or, you know, Tekken 8 or something, right? It's a brand new IP that a studio, a big studio and a big publisher decided to throw a lot of money into and try to make a whole new world, which we don't get enough of that anymore in games, I feel like. So I'm a fan of that happening in general, right? So yeah, that's what it is. 7.5 out of 10. Forspoken on Repaul. Check it out. Boom.